Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another week of Blumira Briefings, your weekly update on the most important headlines and info for your security practice. My name is Zoe Lindsay. I am joined today by a lean crew of two of my teammates, Chris Ferner and Mike Toole. Gents, you want to introduce yourselves?
I am Chris Ferner. I am on the customer experience team here at Blumira. My role is head of partner enablement, so helping our partners and customers in general to get the most out of Blumira.
And I'm Mike Toole, Director of Security and IT for Blumira.
Thank you. And so we've got a full agenda for today's show. We had edits and stories going in right up until just minutes before we started recording. So let's go ahead and dive in. Kicking off, as we always do, with the critical security update news. We'll be starting with a story about a Docker desktop flaw that allows attackers to hijack Windows hosts. This affects the Engine API and can be reached without authentication through a local address from any running container. The enhanced container isolation security feature doesn't mitigate the vulnerability. And a new container binding to the host C drive to the container's file system can be created using two wget post requests without the need for code execution rights inside of the container. Docker has already responded. Desktop version 4.44.3 for Windows addresses this exploit. So we'll share the details there. Make sure that you update if you are using Docker Desktop. I think this is a good opportunity to consider container security strategy, right? Are teams relying solely on those inbuilt checks like ECI? Do they have visibility into what containers are running or are accessing within the environment, whether that's local or networked resources? Mike, what are some best practices that you try and follow to make sure that we're keeping a handle on that?
Yeah, so I think one big thing to note here is this is not the Docker server version, right? This is the desktop version you would run on Mac or Windows. Both are vulnerable, by the way. So typically when most people run these, it's non-production. It's spinning stuff up or building images yourself, right? Like testing things and then exposing it to your browser for localhost, that kind of stuff, right? So unless you're building your images from scratch, which some people are, most people are getting them from somewhere or starting with a base image from somewhere. So this is a perfect example of scan the thing before you run it. Docker is a hypervisor. I think we all know that hypervisors are not infallible. And if you're running it on your desktop machine, all it takes is one escape and now it's on your desktop, right? You're running an app. So if you walk back, where did I get this? Is it reputable? Scan it with a security tool. There's plenty of open source ones or free ones. Sneak is a perfect tool for this. There's plenty of other ones if you just want to run stuff locally on your machine. Scan it before you run the app, basically. These are apps running on your machine. That's about it.
Yeah. I think there's a common kind of misunderstanding that containerization does not necessarily mean that the risk itself is contained, right? You still need to be considering what you're sharing access to, how it's being used, what sort of oversight there is.
I think you had said something about, that Docker desktops usually use non-production, which of course means that there's less oversight over, if people even should be using Docker desktop. So, it's another instance to, for administrators to, know what's being used. That way, when these kind of things come up, you can ensure that, there's an update strategy in place for it.
Yep, indeed. I will also say that I've done a fair bit of securing Docker desktop, especially on the Mac side. I will tell you, it just does weird things with scripts when it starts up. It does lots of scary stuff. Not a huge fan. Also, buyer beware, I guess.
I've never had good luck with Docker desktop. I always just use real Docker in Linux, and
there's a daemon version. You can use it via the command line. That's what it was designed for.
Yep.
Yeah. Wasn't there I saw something making the rounds that Docker Desktop was being flagged as malware on startup in Mac OS. It was happening at least with one version a while back.
Yeah, if you know like Mac OS security, things that I've found is Docker creating Apple scripts to trigger itself to do updates, right? It's like all the scary stuff that malware does, it also does too, legitimately. So, it's just one of those things.
Next up, we have a new update from CISA adding 3 vulnerabilities to the known exploited vulnerability catalog, including a high-severity Git code execution flaw and 2 Citrix session recording vulnerabilities in a medium severity. Both were given a September 15th remediation deadline for federal agencies, but obviously this is still best practice for everyone to update for. The Git vulnerability was caused by mishandling carriage return characters in config files. So if you published a repo with a submodule that ended in that slash or backslash, I always mix up which is which. This is a forward slash, right?
Forward slash, yeah.
Followed by a symlink to your malicious hook. You would be able to execute code. This was identified early in July and fixed in the new versions released 2.4, 3.7, and upwards. There were also 2 Citrix vulnerabilities allowing authorized users in the same Active Directory domain to escalate privileges to a network service account. We will share the CVE and original article details here. There's also official advisories from Get and the Kev catalog alert. In terms of mitigations, obviously first choice to update. Workaround, if Git updating isn't possible, disable Git hooks globally or enforce audited submodules. And Citrix, the workaround is patch or don't use it until it's patched, which is, I can say that that's simple and straightforward.
Thanks, Citrix.
Right. So how do you prevent developers from cloning random risky repos? Is just clone this repo in tutorials, which I definitely see all the time, a security anti-pattern that we need to have some process to address. I think we talk a lot about how training can't be a cure-all for behavior patterns. Like we need to have better ways of enforcing or making the path of least resistance the secure option. So is there something that we can put in place to try and help with this tendency of, well, this step says copy and paste this install script that's going to clone these repos? That's probably fine, right?
It's Mike probably knows more about this stuff, but yeah, it's tough because all over the internet you'll find helpful tutorials that will fix all your problems with random things, and even who knows if that repo was good a month ago and isn't good now.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons CISA is like really pushing this hard is because like it's a big deal not patching, right? Like the way you solve this is by patching. You can do all the things you want, like configure sane Git submodule stuff, right? Like manage your users' Git deployments. But at the end of the day, like there probably will be more bugs like this. They also aren't very often, just because like Git is such an old code base. People don't tend to find bugs often. They find big ones occasionally, right? So just like this, just patch it. It's everywhere. Look everywhere. There's going to be desktop apps that install Git, even if you're not a developer, right? Like there's going to be cloning apps that install Git to do updates. I would honestly just check all the places you think it might even be, because protecting against this is tough. Like, okay, you could tell your users like don't only clone things from places that you trust, but then what if somebody forked a repo, brought it into your GitHub account, and then now like the submodules in there, but it's trusted by right. Like there's plenty of ways to get a bad Git repo. I would honestly just patch this.
Then we had some high-severity vulnerabilities that were patched in Chrome and Firefox. Chrome releasing several updates in Chrome 139, fixing a shocker high-severity V8 JavaScript engine vulnerability. This one found by Google's Big Sleep AI agent. Mozilla also released a fix in Firefox 142 for 9 issues, 5 of which were high severity, including memory corruption and sandbox escape flaws. So as mentioned, the Chrome vulnerability was found by Big Sleep, the vulnerability hunting AI agent launched by Google in November to automate vulnerability discovery. 139 for Windows and Mac OS is going to be, 139.0.7258.138 is going to be for Windows and Mac OS. 139.0.7258.138 specifically for Linux users. There were also some medium severity uninitialized memory issue bugs and low severity spoofing and denial of service bugs. For both the Firefox and Chrome vulnerabilities, neither have known disclosed exploits, but obviously these should be updated as soon as possible. And I just had to highlight here, this is a continued trend of identified memory safety issues in JavaScript engines that demand some rapid patching. It is a shock to all of us to find that there are security vulnerabilities in the use of JavaScript. Going down to mitigations, update as soon as possible. I always love to mention the default update posture of Chrome that it will run the update and remind you to just restart the browser. In the notes I put, I really don't have a lot for us to say here. This is, I think, the 6th of these Chrome V8 JavaScript engine vulnerabilities. Maybe slightly less, but it feels like 6. And Mike, I know you added here, it is kind of neat that this agent is doing a pretty decent job of finding these impactful bugs. Obviously, you can't prevent vulnerabilities from being discovered. You can only hope to identify them as early as possible, ideally in the pre-released timeline.
Yeah, I think it's neat too, like Google Big Sleep. If people aren't familiar, it's like a crazy system they've been running for a few years now that basically fuzzes all of their code and like finds potential bugs and then hands it over to them for polishing, right? So that they can, like, yes, this is a critical, right? Like it's not doing everything, but it's doing the heavy lifting. And I've recently seen a trend where like it keeps finding bugs in Firefox and Chrome, and I was like very curious as to why this is happening. And then I found out that apparently Chrome and Firefox have very similar sandboxing techniques. So like that's exactly why it's finding the same bugs in both of them because they do very similar things with their JavaScript engines. So more trends, I guess. Hopefully like both of these, can continue to get updated and they find it before attackers do.
Yeah, it's pretty neat that, like you said, AI is doing some good here. At this point, get used to updating your browser every few days. It's just a fact of life now. The browser is the platform now, so it's going to need updates constantly.
Yeah, I feel like we should culturally make it like a norm that if you see the relaunch button, that's like a badge of shame. It's like you waited too long.
Can we gamify it, Mike? Can we find a way to gamify the fastest to update?
Yeah.
Whoever's getting their updates done fastest.
Yeah.
Keen-eyed viewers can run it back a few seconds to see me nervously just double check that I'm not pending an update before I sign on to that. I'm good. Moving into our most changed trends of the week. On the threat side, suspicious service launch on Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. A fatal severity ESET alert, Mimikatz process creation. That's always a concerning one to see unless it's in the context of a pen test. Dump Active Directory database with NTDS util. And then let's see, possible data exfiltration on LastPass and high alert on CrowdStrike, which had a pretty big bump week over week. Anything stand out on these guys?
That CrowdStrike, I think, is due to their change in their API.
Got it.
Yeah, they added some new features. We've been doing a couple updates to keep on top of it. I won't say that they did a good or bad job. They rolled out some new features, I think, as they documented them. So we were kind of playing catch up there. But I think we're on top of it now.
I will add here that this does kind of underscore the importance of detection maintenance and not just rule creation, right? We find out what this telemetry is to identify a pattern to detect activity, but in most cases, software or services are going to continue to get updates, and eventually some of that may affect the reliability or actual ability of that rule to function. So there was an article, I think we shared it as a resource a while ago, about detections as code and in the context of, change management and revisiting to see when updates need to be made to rules. Looking at suspects, we've got a Palo Alto 100% CPU usage alert, PowerShell Empire module, signed binary proxy execution of MSHTA. Not going to even try and turn that into a pronounceable English. Cert util download, SonicWall 5+ login failures, followed by successful authentication, and renamed PowerShell. There we go. We have in the most changed, we've got an appearance for remote access by Screen Connect. So usually we see those in the top trends.
Big shout out for SonicWall customers, do your patches. People are banging away at SonicWall right now. It's been a tough summer, I think, for SonicWall admins that don't neglect your patches. Review your config, review their SonicWall notifications, because there's been a lot of, especially VPN issues this summer with SonicWall.
Sorry, my brain was furiously trying to figure out how to make hotfix summer a good joke, and literally I couldn't get there. Just got to the term. Looking at risks, as we always do, obviously you don't want to just look for things once they've risen to the level of a threat. We want to try and identify potential issues early. So some good examples here where these may not represent active threats, but still represent risk that you can address early. 500 or more file deletions within SharePoint, update of application consent policy, disabling MFA on Azure, user lock on Okta, API key generated on Google Cloud. We're going to have a story about non-human identities in a bit, so that's relevant there. And files shared with personal email addresses on Microsoft 365, bringing up the rear there. I'll zoom back out. Even with my glasses, I had to max out our dock size to be able to read my screen caps there. Moving into our more general security stories for this week, there is an interesting article about hackers who have stolen Microsoft logins by misusing ADFS redirects. So this research was found by some researchers from Push Security, and they found that several of their customers were being targeted using legit office.com links combined with an attacker-configured ADFS to redirect users, which bypassed the URL-based detection filtering by trusted Microsoft infrastructure. So the attack started with malicious sponsored ads for Office 265, probably a much cheaper bid rate, playing off of folks that have a typo in their search, then set up a custom Microsoft tenant with ADFS configured. So what would happen is the user would click the malicious result, which would go to office.com. From there would redirect to, in this case, a kind of intermediate domain of blue-grain tours, and then redirect to the phishing page. To the user, it looks like a legitimate office.com redirect. ADFS can act as a single sign-on solution, allowing folks to log in. It appears to be more experimental than targeting specific industries or part of an organized campaign. And this is different from previous ADFS attacks that would spoof the organization's login pages. So this is kind of sort of like a cloud-based living off the land attack by misusing office.com and misusing those trusted sources that'll get somewhat of a lower level of scrutiny. What are some good ways to try and detect malicious use of legit services like this? Or what can admins do to kind of help reduce the risk? Maybe an allow list of trusted tenants?
Yeah, I mean, this is part of this kind of to me sounds like an older attack where instead of using Office.com redirects, that these were just hard coded SMB links, kind of the same thing. Does that sound kind of familiar to you, Mike?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Like this one's it's almost like using ADFS as a proxy, and then like Office.com doing open redirects. So it's like very similar, but I think the big culprit here is just having ADFS, like in general, right? Like this is a reminder that not everyone needs it. There are plenty of Azure services that replace ADFS. Not saying like you have to, but definitely it expands your attack service running it, especially on-prem. This one's like pretty wild, and it feels to me like someone's testing their tools. Because it's got some crazy stuff in here. One of the things that this method can do is effectively use like conditional forwarding to figure out if you're a target or not, and then just like blindly pass you through to the regular auth. So you would never even know or see it in the URLs because it's all happening on the ADFS side, right? Yeah. So it's like only triggers on targets. Very hard to spot, like URL filtering, not going to catch this. URLs are going to come from anywhere. Like it literally could come from like a messaging app or anywhere outside the browser and like initiate it. And that will be pretty hard to see, from the defender side. So, glad that it's not like fully baked yet, I guess. There are some ways to look through your like ADFS logs for like through the proxy. We should be able to see anytime like login.microsoftonline.com is like forwarding to anything other than your domain, right? Like, because that's what it's doing, right? It's forwarding from there to some other random ADFS server, creating a grant, and then forward you on to like the normal Microsoft login. So it's kind of like a weird man in the middle with SSO, sort of, right. I guess. But it's like this is all the way the protocol works.
Yep. And I think we talk a lot about, the importance of routine review to make sure that, you are keeping things up to date, that you are revoking resources that are no longer needed. I think this is a good example of a reminder. Periodically taking a look at systems and processes to see if it's still the best way to go about it. Like Mike is saying, in a lot of cases, there's better options available now than ADFS. So the solution that worked for you 3 years, 5 years, 10 years ago, there's a decent chance that there may be a more streamlined and or more rigorously updated and maintained way to do it now. Okay, I'm excited because we've got a couple of stories here. Oh, before we get to our research story of the week, we had a late breaking story. We are recording this on Wednesday, just last night. A news story broke that Chief Data Officer of the Social Security Administration, Charles Borges, filed, I hope that is pronounced somewhat like Ernst Borgnine. Charles Borges filed a protected whistleblower disclosure alleging the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, created a live copy of the U.S. Social Security database into a unapproved cloud environment, circumventing security oversight and potentially exposing over 300 million Americans' personal information to identity theft and other harms. Borges disclosed that specifically a live copy of the NumIdent, Numerical Identification System database, not following the typical security monitoring, oversight, or record-keeping mechanisms, into a cloud environment, that copy will contain all data submitted for Social Security card applications. So that's your usual PII, names, addresses, date of birth, obviously Social Security numbers. Will also include parents' names and citizenship status, and some other potentially identifiable information. This, according to Doge, was self-authorized to copy after a Supreme Court ruling in June lifted a temporary restraining order. The CIO for a Social Security Administration, Aram Magadasi, a Doge affiliated official, approved the transfer, stating the business need is higher than the security risk, and we accept all risks associated with implementation. This was assessed as very high risk by internal Social Security Administration resources, and noted it has the potential for a catastrophic impact. Borges was excluded from discussions about the project, and noted that a worst case scenario could require issuing new Social Security numbers to all Americans. That describes 3 escalating phases of wrongdoing. The whistleblower complaint, that is from March to July, including circumventing court orders and approving activities outside of normal review procedures. This is like a nightmare scenario of shadow IT processes, right? So, as individual citizens, this is kind of totally out of our control. But there are some important lessons here. Almost all businesses are going to have data that they share with third parties. So knowing what parties are doing with this data, I think that it is worth mentioning that this story came out the same week as the national data operation that was breached a while back and exposed some 300 million Social Security numbers from a data broker database that got breached, is now resuming operations. So this is not the first time that there has been a potential exposure of a huge amount of supposedly, kind of secure PII. So having a plan for if that third-party data does get breached is important. I will give I see we've got it in the notes. Yeah, anytime there's a mention of like data exposure, including Social Security numbers, just going to say it again, put a free freeze on your credit. There's a great Krebs article that I use when I send this advice to family members that explains like why it's important and links directly to the freeze page for each bureau. I can pop that into the resources for this week too. Jens, what do you want to add there?
Just I want to mention on the credit freeze thing, like you said, we'll put some resources out there. You don't need to pay for credit freezes. It does not cost money. Don't go through third party. There's various things out there like a LifeLock or whatever, right, that do this. Go right to the source, in my opinion, unless you've got some sort of really good reason to go somewhere else for it.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely worth it. The other thing I'll say is like, I've locked all my kids' Social Security numbers just because like you're not 18 doesn't mean that your data can't get stolen. So also a good pro tip.
Same. It's not as easy.
It's not as easy.
A bunch of copies of birth certificates and whatnot. So get that homework done, and then you have to mail it in usually or scan stuff in. It's not as easy. Yeah,
but I would say, like, in my opinion, it's worth it for like where we are in the amount of data breaches that are happening constantly, and like the amount of PII that's just like loose on the internet. It's a very normal thing now for like your data to just be out there. And it may not be used, but it may at some point. So
I think the kind of unique thing here is that, Social Security numbers have been in the wind for years. Like everybody's got, or you can get Social Security numbers anywhere. I don't know if there's ever been a leak that has parent and child Social Security numbers linked together here.
Yeah.
Good point.
Unique data set that they have.
The tough part too with this is like the amount of metadata that comes with a Social Security number and is linked to the Social Security number is that's the important thing here. Most people don't know this. Like Social Security numbers are actually like you can generate them. You can usually generate, like if you know a few things, like you can actually guess the number. It's not that complicated. It's not easy, but it's like definitely not impossible. and like people do this, right? But you definitely need the metadata that goes along with it, which is probably in this database. And my big thing here is just like, every time you have data in two places, you now have to protect two different things. It's hard enough to protect this data like in one place, and we have like data governance for a reason, right? Like data governance is literally the practice of like securing and governing data. And now you're doing it in two places. They're probably not the same for reasons, right? Like, so it's just like, why would like try to make your life not complicated, keep data in one place. Like we've done this for years. It's how most people do things.
Yep. I know that one of the first social media rules that I internalized is regardless of what the permission on a post is, just assume it's going to be public at some point. And time has shown that is true more often than we would like. So I think taking a similar approach of assume that someone has your social security number, what does your defense look like with that being true? Things like putting a credit freeze on is a great example. Things like looking at the critical services that you use, like your bank accounts, your cell phone provider. Oftentimes, these will default to last four of social as one of the verification methods. I often try, doesn't always work, but I do try to add a note to my account to not allow authorization using last four. Ideally, they're going to have a notification system like a token generator or ability to push through their app. Failing that, I would prefer a passcode that is unique to that account that I create as an authorization method versus defaulting to the last four of my social. So that's another kind of aspect to consider here, is that socials are treated as a private identifier when in reality, we can't think of them as such anymore.
Yep.
Moving from that into happier news, there is a new identity report out from CyberArk about non-human identities, specifically talking about their growth and prevalence as we see more and more AI agents. In their research, they found that NHIs now outnumber actual human identities at a ratio of 82 to 1, which is growing very quickly as orgs adopt AI systems that need their own permissions or access controls. Experts are highlighting that there needs to be a plan of governance and review in place to secure AI infrastructure before we see more of these researched attacks actually moving to adversarial attacks, in particular where agents get a level of autonomy and access to sensitive data. Obviously, AI agents present unique challenges. These are not the only form of NHIs. We also see this with third-party app login, with API keys. There's other examples of this, but we are seeing a big increase driven by adoption of AI agents. Also, expect attacks against agents. There's a new novel attack that we're seeing on a weekly or bi-weekly basis right now. There was another story that we didn't have time to include for this week about encoding a prompt injection into a high-res image that's only visible when that image gets downscaled for processing by the agent. So we are still discovering kind of these fundamental vulnerabilities as these things become more widely adopted. Especially things like personal assistant agents may require the same level or greater permissions than human counterparts due to unpredictable LLM permissions and behavior and developers oftentimes defaulting to, I'm going to ask to make sure that I have as much access as I'm possibly going to need versus more strictly scoping. So yeah, we've got some details here. asking a person responsible for the AI and identifying NHIs with unique identifiers. Only configure NHIs with the necessary permissions, using that allow all versus customize, double check the customize. I love the advice to detect and block injection attacks. That's excellent advice. Just know that in advance. There are some great resources already out from OWASP. I have one mentioned here in the notes. I'll include that in the resources. But OWASP is enumerating the most common attack methods that are being leveraged against LLMs and AI agents. So familiarizing yourselves with those in the same way that, we've kind of learned that shorthand at the top 10 for web attacks is going to be a good starting point for getting a handle on this. Mike, what should folks consider if they're kind of trying to start to build an inventory of NHIs in their environment? Some common areas to consider, common methods of trying to surface those?
It's funny. It's like, okay, don't do prompt injection. It's like, we'll just go to monthofaibugs.com and you'll see all the bugs that were found in August. So it's like hilariously not a thing at all. I think the biggest thing is to just like reframe what you think an agent is, right? Like, it's not a magic service that just happens and does things. These are, programs or command line tools that like run on whatever behalf you give them and whatever permissions you give them, right? So, the bare minimum for this is definitely inventory them, right? Like, these are assets, these are software assets, these are system assets. Treat them like that. Understand like when you're provisioning them, who has access, what privileges they have. Monitor the keys for them if you can. It's getting pretty wild now because like some of these literally run on OAuth grants. So, users can just do this if you let them, right? Like, they'll just authorize an AI bot or an agent to like use OAuth and like your permissions with whatever you grant, right? So like, be careful when you're granting OAuth scopes for these things, right? Like, only give them the amount of things that they need, right? Like if it's a calendar scheduling bot, don't give it access to your email, like, right? Like, it just needs access to your calendar, right? Like, it's the minimizing of these things. And most of these are being built very quickly. So, that's not necessarily being done on the bot side. Especially if you're getting these from who knows where, and it's just like an MCP server connecting in. We're kind of in like the AI Wild West right now. I like to think of it as like the early 2000s when everyone figured out that you have to like sanitize input for JavaScript. And it's like, yeah, you definitely do. Every web form can't just accept whatever data user puts in. So like, that's the other thing here is figure out who can talk to these things, who can put input into these things. It might not be like a chat session, but it might be like scans all incoming email, right? Like, well, I can email you too, right? So understand all the inputs and outputs. And this is where it's like, you really do have to think about what these agents are doing, and then scope them up like very tightly.
Well, and it's interesting because sanitization in the context of, input that could potentially be interpreted as a prompt is a much fuzzier problem. Like, if you're trying to prevent XSS attacks, you can do a search for escape character, testing. The avenues of input where that could be appearing that you need to check against. But how do you do a universal sanitization? Do you filter to remove any requests in written communication? Like, it's not necessarily practical to do that. So this is going to be an ongoing process, and we're likely going to be in a state for a while where we're seeing novel ways of injecting prompts at a much more rapid pace than best practices to prevent it. So taking that same approach, we've Most of these AI services and tools are still built on a underlying model from one of the major providers, whether that's ChatGPT or who have you. We've seen lots of examples of things like chat conversations that folks had set to private that end up getting indexed by search engines. So, take that same approach that we're talking about. If everything that I'm putting into here was public, was discoverable, would that be an issue, and how large would that issue be? That should be one of those questions that you're considering when you're evaluating using a new tool and the level of access that you're granting to it.
Yeah, it's tricky. I was thinking just now about how, prison phone calls are monitored. Yeah, that's kind of like how you have to monitor, bad instructions or, prompt injection. There's no, you know it when you see it. You can't just write a rule for it.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. We definitely are in like a catch-up phase for a lot of that right now, where it's like the tech is moving faster than the controls, which is, I don't know, honestly, how security works for new technology most of the time. But like, hopefully we get there, and hopefully like we don't, there's a lot of cost saving methods that are happening right now just because things are so expensive. My hope is like, that's not a place that people skimp because, and then they have to learn the lesson the hard way.
I think one of the big takeaways that we can just take from, the trend in these stories that we've been including is that the red teams only need to be right once, blue teams need to be right every time, only gets exponentially more uneven when you're talking about it's something that can do that at many, many, many times faster than a human could. So if you don't have a intentional and considered approach to managing AI, whether that is tools adopted, info shared with them, access granted, I would strongly encourage putting that as one of your main priorities for this year, because this is only going to increase over time. That is going to do it for this week on Blumira Briefings. I want to thank all of you watching for joining us. I want to thank Chris and Mike for joining and sharing their expertise. Please keep the feedback coming on topics or stories you'd like us to see in future episodes. Do all of the YouTube things that make this more likely to show up on your timeline if you'd like for that to happen. And until next time, stay safe out there. Bye, everyone.